I think it is better. Okay, I will make a small. Okay. So thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. This is a special discussion that we are going to have within the cycle that we are organizing about the 50 years of the democracy in Portugal. We have organized, as you know, already two sessions, and we are going to have other sessions. But this one is very special because we have with us Professor Larry Diamond, that I know, and the Professor João Caspada, that was during lots of years the director of the Political Institute of Studies of Católica, is with us. It's a great honor that he is with us. And we know Larry Diamond from his comings to Portugal to give us lots of smart lessons about democracy. So the idea today is that Professor Larry Diamond speaks with us about 20, 25 minutes about democracy, the challenge of democracy, eventually putting some ideas about the Portuguese case. Then Professor Spada will make a very smart and brief comment on that, and then we'll have a discussion within all of you. I think we'll have very good ideas and discussion. Professor Larry Diamond, thank you very much for your opportunity, for your disponibility, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. And of course, anytime I can see my longtime friend and our dear colleague in the Journal of Democracy, João Espada, it's a good day for me. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share some of what I presented to the National Endowment for Democracy in the annual Seymour Martin Lipset lecture just a few months ago. Try and take stock of where democracy, how democracy has evolved over the last 50 years of the so-called third wave of global democracy that began with the revolution of the carnations in April 1974. And then from that, think about where we may be going. So I can share these slides with you because I'm not going to cover them all. So some of you, you're welcome to look them over in more detail. But the summary of what I have to say is that, and it's borne out by the recently released surveys of Freedom House and the Economist Intelligence Unit, we're still in a global democratic recession. I think it's been going on since 2007, maybe 2006. In some ways, it's gaining momentum. In any case, it shows no signs of relenting. I think if you're familiar with Huntington's book, that he had this theory that there were waves of democracy and they were followed by reverse waves in which there were many more breakdowns of democracy than transitions to democracy. We haven't seen during these 17 years a scale of democratic reversals anything like what we experienced in the interwar period of the 1920s and 30s of the 20th century, or the immediate post-colonial period when there was a wave of hopeful democratizations after World War II and then a shocking retreat. It's more of a leveling off and really, I think, still a democratic recession. There are some elements of democratic resilience. We'll see what happens in the EU parliamentary elections in June. Some people are worried about a turn to the illiberal right. But, aside from Hungary, which is no longer a democracy and has not been for some time, under Viktor Orban, there's no other European democracy that has defected from democracy. And there are many other, democracies, relatively liberal or relatively more established democracies that have kind of held their own. Of course, we have the great success stories of Korea and Taiwan and East Asia. In short, I think we're in a very volatile period, and it could become still a reverse wave and a much more disastrous period. And one of the things that most worries me, I know it worries Joao because it's been a recurrent theme of the remarkable gathering that the Instituto has hosted each year in Estoril, is the erosion of liberal values. The erosion of liberal values in the United States. I'm in the middle of it on an elite university campus, and just the decline of civic education and the erosion of the kind of global narrative of universal values and liberal democracy in many international forums. And of course, China and Russia are doing everything they can sorry about that, to advance that. I don't know how I went from the beginning to the end so fast, but we'll keep going. So I see 8 key
That's
trends.
okay. That's okay. It's okay.
Yeah,
Fair.
yeah. We're back to the order, proper order.
Yes.
So I see 8 key trends in the world. I won't get through all my slides, so you'll just want to remember these 8 key trends, and we can come back and talk about them in greater depth. One, as I'll show you very shortly, levels of freedom and democracy have been in steady decline for the last 17 years. Second, there's been deterioration in the rule of law and in institutions of accountability. Not so much in the liberal democracies, although we have this problem in the US, but certainly in a lot of democracies in the global South, and so on. Around the world, and this is something I worry about in Europe. I worry about it, obviously, where it has seized control of a government in Hungary. We were worried about it in Poland, but the tide has turned there. I think we should be worried about it in Italy now, in France, in Germany, and so on. Illiberal populism is still spreading around the world, and it's not only dragging some countries below the minimum threshold of even electoral democracy. I would argue that's in the process of happening now in the world's largest democracy, India. But it's just creating a nasty and worrisome tone, a dangerous milieu in a lot of other countries. We don't know where this may lead. And of course, we have the possibility, very real possibility, that the most dangerous illiberal populist in the entire universe of advanced industrial democracies, Donald Trump, could well be elected president of the United States again this November. And then underlying this, I think it is the single most important global factor underlying the trend toward illiberal populism is growing polarization, and underlying that, the most important driver of growing polarization, which is social media. I have a lot more I could say about that, but we can leave that for the discussion. I think we are still only in the process of really beginning to comprehend the full measure of danger and damage that social media represent to liberal democracy, and I can explain why. Then, as has been a recurrent theme in recent years of the Estoril gatherings, we have the rise of powerful authoritarian actors that have been trying to redefine global norms and undermine the leadership, moral leadership, and practical leadership of the liberal democracies of the so-called West. Russia, China, but not only Russia and China, Iran is increasingly malevolent here and dangerous in the Middle East and beyond, and some other actors as well. I've already alluded to the decay of democratic quality in the US. It would accelerate shockingly if Trump were elected this November. And then, we can debate how much we should worry about Giorgia Meloni, the League in Italy, Marine Le Pen, who I think we have to regard as the leading candidate to be the next president of France, alternative for Germany. We'll see how well they do in the elections. The new Dutch prime minister, not so new, but not so liberal, and so on. I could review a lot of public opinion data from the emerging market countries, but I can say there's still broad aspiration for democracy, but it's becoming more under challenge, and there are very serious declines in democratic trust and satisfaction in a lot of countries. And then finally, if you look at all the movements for democracy in the world in the last 15 years or so, high-profile mass movements in places like Burma, Sudan, Iran, Venezuela, and so on, they've all failed, every single one of them. And now with the coup in Tunisia, that one as well. So this is not a happy picture. I think you know the definition of electoral democracy and liberal democracy. I don't have to go over this. This was the trend in terms of electoral and liberal democracy in the various regions of the world beginning at the end of 2022. I've just gone over the data for the end of 2023. And what's surprising to me, or noteworthy, I should say, it actually wasn't a surprise to me, is that for the first year in my memory of making these judgments at the end of each year, no country left the category of electoral democracy and no country moved into it. One or two differences in terms of liberal democracy, whether they quite meet that threshold. I could explain the methodology I use. But in essence, this picture, this regional picture at the end of 2022 is exactly the same regional picture at the end of 2023. And you see that for Western Europe, that's what Europe and the Anglophone countries are, and the 4 English-speaking states, they're all liberal democracies. I hope we can keep that in the case of the US. Pacific Island states, Central and Eastern Europe, 82% of them are democracies, but only 59% meet the test of liberal democracy. And then you go on to Latin America and the Caribbean. Here I'm only counting countries over 1 million population. As you go down the ladder regionally, you see, smaller and smaller percentage, Asia, Africa, and so on. And then when you compare the end of the glory period of democratic expansion in 2006 with the end of 2022, and keep in mind, when I say end of 2022, I can now say end of 2023 because nothing changed last year. You see there's been a lot of erosion in Central and Eastern Europe. The percentage of electoral democracies declined from 93% to 82%. Latin America declined from 86 to 70%. Decline in Asia, India, and Indonesia, I think you could argue really no longer meet a democratic test, Africa, and so on. And then a little bit less change in the smaller percentage that are liberal democracies. So the situation doesn't look so bad. if we study the trends in this blue line here of countries that are electoral democracies, the percentage of states in the world that meet a test of electoral democracy has declined from a peak of, oh, say 62% or so in 2004, 5, 6, somewhere around there, around 60%, to around 53%. But, well, you're not seeing it here. If you look at countries only over 1 million population, that number falls to about 43% of all the states over 1 million, because they are, you know, you've got so many tiny states in the Caribbean and the South Pacific that, you know, may have 100,000 people or 10,000 people. They're democracies, but come on, you know, you're distorting the global picture if you count them in that way. Anyway, a few more numbers. You can see here that from each decade, beginning with the start of the third wave of global democratization, there was a high rate of democratic breakdown in that decade. About 1 in 6 of all the democracies broke down. But then that rate fell to only 1 in 12. And then it's been rising ever since. And in the last decade, 1 of every 5 democracies has broken down. And then you see a declining rate of transition from authoritarianism to democracy in each decade, a net loss of 10% of all the world's democracies in the last decade. And then this famous figure from Freedom House, which shows the balance of countries gaining in freedom each year to the percent declining. And we thought, you know, the 15 post-war Cold War years, 1991 to 2005, was usually a very healthy balance, 1.5, 2.5 times as many countries gaining in freedom as the number declining. And then that pattern reversed beginning in 2007. We thought it had stabilized last year, but that was an illusion. Last year, Freedom House found only 40% as many countries gained in freedom, 21, as the number that declined, 52. So why did the democratic recession begin around 2006? You've got the Iraq War, you've got the financial crisis. I would put a lot of emphasis on the rise of social media and how undermining it has been of social cohesion and truth, any kind of shared truth. And then I think many things, globalization, the technology boom, and so on. We're seeing growing concentration of wealth and income almost everywhere within countries. And this is not healthy for democracy. And many people are attracted to populism because I think of the cultural shocks of globalization, but also because they feel economically insecure. And that is something that the advanced democracies have a lot of thinking to do about. Here you can see, if you take a broader look over the period 2006 to 22, how many countries significantly improve their level of freedom, how many decline, you know, of the, you know, democracies, many more decline by 5 or more points on a 100-point scale. Many more declined than improved. And this light colored pink category here refers to the bigger states, states with over 100 million population or over $500 billion in GDP. And you can see that the big states did especially poorly. Of the 13 democracies that were more consequential in that way, only 11 declined and only 2 improved. And of the 8, kind of Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, well, not Venezuela, but other consequential autocracies that are very wealthy or have a lot of population, they all declined. And these are the countries where you see some big countries that declined, only a couple improved. All the big authoritarian countries worsened, none improved. You see my point. These are the regional trends in liberal democracy in the global south. You can see they're all trending downward. And then if you separate out transparency and the rule of law, the green line, from political rights and civil liberties, you see that one reason for this decline is how badly countries are doing in controlling corruption and ensuring a rule of law. And I think that if I can just put it in a sentence, I think the single biggest threat to democracy in certainly the global south is bad governance, political corruption, and the cynicism about politics and democracy that it breeds among their citizens. These are many instances of democracy movements that all failed. I think you're familiar with many of them. So let me close with a few analytic slides, and that'll bring me to my 25 minutes. I think that we have to worry both about norms and about institutions. The norms have been eroding, and I think we often take them for granted at the mass level and among our youth. God bless Joao. He's been trying to wage that battle with your young people in Portugal in these annual convenings. Those sorts of things are actually relatively rare. Honestly, I don't think we're doing really nearly enough to try and build an understanding of and commitment to liberal values and the fight for freedom around the world. And there are too many elites that have a very instrumental commitment to democracy, if any at all. Public trust in democracy is eroding, in part because of social media and economic disappointments. So I've mentioned the next two bullets. And then you've got China and Russia flooding the zone with their authoritarian propaganda and their efforts to create doubt and cynicism about everything, about any form of truth, and certainly about democracy. All forms of accountability have been declining, the horizontal accountability of independent legislatures, independent courts, independent counter-corruption commissions, independent civil service. All of these are things that illiberal populists seek to go after. Societies are less effective at holding democratic government accountable because they're very polarized on identity terms and sometimes on ideological terms, and they're distracted by other issues. I was asked to, I gave a similar lecture to this one 48 hours ago to a group of Tunisian activists, young democracy activists in Tunisia, who were trying to figure out how to get back to democracy in Tunisia. I gave my lecture. There were a couple of questions about, transitions to democracy, how they take place, the international environment. Then someone asked about the conflict in Israel, the Palestinian struggle, and what they characterized as a white settler, colonial, imperial oppression visited upon the Palestinian people by the state of Israel. And it was off to the races. For the next 45 minutes, these young people who desperately want to get back to their democracy in their country had nothing to say or ask about the struggle for democracy in their country. all they could do is vent their rage about Gaza, which is tragic in terms of the loss of life. I said, well, don't you think Hamas bears some responsibility, and that you should view it as progress to try and liberate the people of Gaza from the extreme misogynistic, neo-totalitarian, homophobic, and all the rest, illiberal doesn't capture it, governance of this terrorist group, Hamas. And they said, well, that's not for you in the West or anybody else to deal with. It's for the people of Gaza to deal with. I mean, it's kind of like saying it was for the people of Germany to deal with Hitler. It was the people of the USSR to deal with Stalin. I mean, it doesn't always work out that people have the ability to do that, but this is a lot of what dominates now. In many of these places, institutions are weak or weakening. I think we have to worry about both the integrity and the public support for and faith in our institutions. I worry about economic performance. I have made reference to it, but look, we have a lot of experience in interwar Europe with the Weimar Republic as the poster child of what happens to political beliefs, alignments, and orientations when people are scared about the future economically and feel that they don't have any hope. And then public order gives rise to extremist groups and criminal gangs. So I'm not without hope, but I think we're in a very dangerous period. Anyway, I'll stop there and welcome all your comments and questions.
Okay. So, Larry Diamond, thank you very much for your keynote. As you know, we appreciate very much your experience in democracy and the insights you came for us. So the idea that we have is that Professor Espada, that you know very well, will make a comment, 10 minutes about your keynote and the experience we have. Then we have you as people with different experience and management, and they will try to moderate the session. The idea is that we have groups of three comments and questions. But before I will pass to Professor Spada. Professor Spada, thank you very much for being with us. It's an honor. And I hope that you can comment on Larry Diamond. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. And it's a great pleasure to be here with you and with my very good friend, Professor Larry Diamond. And I'm delighted to recall that we have met a couple of years ago, I think about 28, in fact, 28 years ago, when I visited you at Stanford University. I was doing a short visiting professorship, and you were a fellow of Stanford and the Hoover Institution, as you still are. So this was back in 1996. Then I think in 1997 or 1998, you came to Portugal to give your lecture within the lecture series called the Democratic Invention. And then this Democratic Invention series was repeated in Washington a couple of years later, I think around 1999, with our friend Mark Pluckner also sort of organizing it in DC. And I have the book that was published. It's a great book. And in fact,
I remember that book. I have it too.
I've revisited the book and recalled that your lecture was actually the second of the series. The first one was Samuel Huntington, and the third one was Mario Soares.
Yes.
Yeah, and we had 13 overall, 13 lectures and 13 chapters in the book. So I just would like to start by recalling these happy memories all times. Now, going back to reading your paper, I noticed that, in fact, I had the idea, I still remember vaguely the title, but I wanted to make sure. And the title was the end of the third wave and the start of the fourth. So this was a very striking title then, and so you at the time, I reread the paper. At the time, you were already drawing our attention to some slight decay, I think that is the expression, in democratization of the third wave that had been a great success, and you were already sort of identifying some signs of you called, I think, slight decay in at least in the pace of the growing democratization around the world. So my first question, which in fact goes back to your paper, but at that time, and it of course goes back to your presentation here, is what has happened to those hopes of 1999 or around that. Of course, you have already spoken about this, but I think it would be interesting if you could add some other remarks on the reasons for the decline of those hopes of the time, and also as you also spoke today, and I think you also invented the expression democratic recession, as I recall, and so perhaps you could tell us a bit about this, why the initial hopes were sort of went down, and why democratic recession started already around those times. So this would be my first question. My second question is about something that you, of course, also mentioned in your talk, your presentation, and it's about the expression sharp power, that I am told that you also invented the term sharp power at MED.
No, that was Chris Walker, our mutual friend.
Oh, it was Chris Walker. Oh, I thought it was you, actually. And actually, the sharp power expression gave the title of the main cover of the Economist magazine, well, a couple of years ago.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and so perhaps you could tell us a bit more about this concept of sharp power. You mentioned authoritarian powers, but perhaps a bit more about sharp power. And the third and final question would be, well, again, you have already spoken about this, but I would dare say, could you tell us a bit more about the rise of populist parties and the growth of their electoral support in several European democracies, and perhaps also in the US, if I may add, but you have already added. And perhaps speaking about this, perhaps you would like to say a bit more about the question of the social media and the role of social media in the rise of populism. Okay, and I don't want to
Fantastic, Professor Spada.
Okay.
Yes. So, Professor Larry Diamond, we have here a first statement for you to comment, and then we'll pass to other questions from the other audience. Okay, thank you very much. You can answer, please, if it is okay for you.
Okay, thank you, João. So I'll maybe take a minute on each of the four. I think with the democratic recession, the early signs of the democratic recession, João, that you were referring to, I think some of that had to do with the fact that, even by then, the easy democratizations had happened, right? The easy democratizations were the ones in countries where following Lipset, following Huntington, where economic development had transformed society, created more middle-class societies, higher levels of education, social change, maybe propelling the country into arenas of interaction and international reference groups that were more liberal and democratic. I think this is certainly part of the story of Portugal's democratization and Spain's. And the more difficult democratizations were in places like Africa, the less developed countries of Latin America and Asia, where it's not impossible to have democracy in low-income countries. We've shown that. In fact, it should be noted, one of the countries that actually improved, there weren't many, but one of the countries that improved in its freedom score last year was Liberia, one of the poorest countries in the world, which is a democracy. But, anyway, reality was starting to catch up, even by the time of our Democratic Convention series. Social media hadn't really taken hold then. Some of the other dynamics hadn't so much taken hold then. But, there was starting to be a kind of like a stock market, the stock market never completely keeps going up. There's always a market correction at some point. And then later on, I think what we encountered by the latter part, toward the end of the first decade of the 21st century, was some of these other things, that we were really beginning to see a backlash against globalization. And now, I think I didn't mention it quite explicitly, a social backlash against immigration. Even if in a country like Hungary or Poland, there aren't that many immigrants, but it's a tool and a fear that illiberal populists can manipulate, the fear of the other. It's a very, very powerful human psychological dynamic. And so that brings me to the rise of these populist parties. I think that they've had a certain amount of raw material to work with. In the US, a lot of concern. We've completely lost control of the southern border in the United States. And I say this as someone who's very pro-immigration. But, if you don't have borders, you don't have a country. And there's a lot of concern about that. And I, as a liberal person who basically favors, quite expansive immigration policies and multicultural society, I also believe in a rule of law. And so when you have, hundreds of thousands of people a year entering your country illegally, you got a problem. And if government doesn't address it, you're going to get a lot of protest votes. And in the end, they may not just be protest votes, but government formation votes for extremely illiberal alternatives that promise to use, quote, tougher measures, end quote, to address it. And I've mentioned the economic dimension, the rising inequality, and so on. And then I do think social media is a very ripe milieu for the rise of illiberal populist movements of the right or left. Populism thrives on and really embodies cynicism about ruling elites, and cynicism about governance, and faith in a populist, a demagogue who promises to fix everything. It thrives on rumor, innuendo, exaggeration, the manipulation of symbols and fears and images. Just think about what social media is. Social media is like a hothouse to grow all of this stuff. It's a perfect forum for demagogues and populists of various kinds. So let me just come back to the sharp power, and if anybody wants, I can expand on any of these themes. So by sharp power, we mean, and I can use this phrase now because I took the concept and applied it to what China is trying to do to penetrate and undermine democracies around the world. And at the Hoover Institution, we produced a book on this in 2018. And that is part of what I think helped to propel the concept of sharp power, though the best work on the subject has been done by Chris Walker's own institution, the International Forum for Democratic Studies at the National Endowment for Democracy. And in our book, we quoted the phrase of the former Australian Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, who was the one who really kind of began to pivot Australia around that time, 2017 or so, into much more acute awareness of what China was trying to do to capture and undermine democracy in Australia and turn it to its advantage, and to raise awareness of it and vigilance. And he defined the danger. He didn't use the word sharp power, but I will equate it as power that is covert, coercive, or corrupting. And I would put and rather than or, covert, coercive, and corrupting. So sharp power is influence efforts, propaganda, corruption, seduction, intimidation that seeks to penetrate the soft tissues of our democracies, our civil society, our mass media, our political parties, our local governments, capture them and win influence over them and use them as instruments to pursue their own national objectives.
Okay, fantastic. So now we're going to have some comments. We have with the Paul Sand, that is was my colleague some years ago in Catholic University, the Professor Espada, and is also someone that is interested in these topics. Paul, do you want to make some comment or some question to Professor Larry Diamond, please?
Yes, thank you, James. Thank you very much for the invitation. I would also like to salute Professor Espada and tell him that it is a pleasure to be with him today. And in fact, the first texts I read of Larry Diamond was in your course in '97. I still remember about those texts. And then afterwards, of course, I read some of the books. But then my problem is that with your lecture, you started giving more and more inputs, and I don't really know what to ask. I have so many questions, so I will try to keep to 3 questions. But I will start with one sentence you just said some minutes ago, which is, I'm going to read: if you don't have borders, you don't have a country. Well, let me tell you that in Europe we don't have borders and we have countries. So I can imagine the answer, but let me tell. Well, yeah. My expertise is for many years is the European Union. So it's just a comment on what you said, because it is possible to not have borders, increase economy and grow, and then at the same time protect our democracy. But my question is very, very quickly. First of all, is what do you think exactly about the European, I would say, change in this last year concerning the way it relates to third world countries, southern countries, because the conditionality clauses are not being applied anymore. They will be applied less and less. The idea that we should impose our values and impose democracy and link, let's say, relationship, cooperation, and all that with democracy is now fading, because and this is being explicitly said by the President of the Commission, and so on. My second question concerns the one thing you didn't mention, which is very much in fashion, but I would like to hear from you, is artificial intelligence. How do you think that this will go? Where this will go? Will this further enhance democracy, or will it damage it? And my third question, final one, is there a smoking gun? You talked about social media, but is there a smoking gun in all this fading of democracies or democratic recession? Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. We have here with us also Luís Neves, that is someone that is involved in high-level global management in terms of information society, technology, and things like that. We know that technology is more and more important in terms of democracy. Luis, do you want to make some comment or some question to Professor Larry Diamond, please?
No, well, Jan, first of all, thank you, and also thank you for the presentation. Very, very interesting. My feeling is that we need to accelerate and take care of what's going on in terms of technological development. I think I mentioned it before, technologies is evolving at the speed of the light, and technology is in the hands of a couple of major players. And so I think it's a fundamental step, really, to manage well technology if we want to ensure democracy. That's a broad statement, and I would like to hear from Larry Diamond what you think about this.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, we have with us also Ana Paula Reis, okay, to have also a Newman speaking about these topics. Anna, you are an entrepreneur and someone that is dealing also with these global issues. Do you want to make some comment to Professor Larry, please?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm not in the best place. I'm in the car, but I'll manage it. During the presentation, first of all, thank you very much. I was actually thinking that between 2006, when you showed the evidence of declining democracy, in 2024, it's 18 years, so majority is coming. And I am relating a lot this serious decline to these new generations that have never experienced what lack of democracy is, and living, particularly in Europe, and in this case in Portugal, what it means to live in a country that has no democracy, where people can't speak, and all the implications. And I'm also thinking at the same time that this majority also comes with the generation of Erasmus, the opening to the world, where we have showed our kids that the world's large, the rising of Europe. So where's the contradiction in here? Where did we fail so deeply? Because also in here, when we look at the extreme right, I don't think it's extreme right, but the rise of extreme right in our case, we are mainly looking at the youngsters. It's not the old generation that are going that way, it's youth. So where did we actually fail, and where's the hope? Because I have to say that after your presentation and all that we are reading, we're not in a very hopeful moment, right? So how do we regain that hope? Or is there really any hope? That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Larry, we have already 3 questions and comments. Please, if you can answer.
Yeah, I'll work backwards. I have plenty of hope. Don't worry about that. I am not a person, as Joao knows, who's given to despair. But I think we need to put this in proportion. That's what I tried to do at the beginning of my presentation. It could be a lot worse, you know. Most of the liberal democracies have held and remain liberal. There are a lot of countries that are slipping backwards. It could still become a tsunami and a reverse wave. It's not quite that yet. There's still been a fair amount of democratic resilience. But the trends, and you all have noted other ones, are very worrisome. So I do take the generational matter very seriously. And I take it seriously with concern in terms of youth going in multiple illiberal directions. So you mentioned the direction of rising youth support for right-wing illiberal alternatives in Europe. Here in the US, the biggest danger is left-wing illiberal populism. And, you know, I am myself a fairly liberal person in every sense. I hate people who reduce things to caricatures and stigmatize immigrants and, you know, create some monster image of a woke community that's trying to convert America's children into being transsexuals and all of this ridiculous cultural warfare. I find it, you know, really disturbing. However, it is true that we have a generation in the United States that is being trained by social media and trained by a lot of, you know, school teachers, yeah, public schools, you know, secondary schools, private schools, and they get to college and then, you know, left-wing faculty, and they're not being induced to develop their faculties of reasoning, critical thinking, evaluating, you know, rumors on the internet, considering different points of view. We have an initiative at Stanford, many American universities do now, to try and revive liberal education. We actually have a mandatory sequence of first year students called civic and liberal education, to try and expose them to, you know, various ideas, and to think and to reason and to listen to different points of view, and to be aware of some of the classical arguments for freedom, for democracy, for tolerance, for rule of law, and so on and so forth. And the experiment has been deeply imperfect so far, in part because the PhD instructors, and this is now, you know, let's keep it confidential, some of them that we're hiring, you know, to actually do the teaching of our freshman first-year students are themselves very illiberal. And so how do you get illiberal people to teach liberal values? So we have a lot of work to do. And I think, Anna Paula, that your insight, which is a separate insight, so you've made the remark about, you know, the general kind of cultural milieu in which a lot of young people are growing up now. But there is also a deeper truth in what you said, or a no less genuine truth, that's extremely important and that I've noted. Almost all of the democracies that emerged during the third wave of global democratization emerged between 1974 and 2000. There's been very little new democracies since 2000. And that means that in South Africa, even in, say, Korea, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Ghana, in a lot of places in the world, and in all of the new democracies of the European Union, nobody under the age of 25, for sure, has any living memory of authoritarianism. And the danger of it, the reality of it, the price that society's paid, and this is an enormous problem. So I just wanted to underscore that. To come to Luis, I'm laughing because I said I wasn't pessimistic, but when it comes to artificial intelligence, I am frightened. And being in the Silicon Valley and surrounded by the innovation in this space, and having done a little bit of reading, I know there are a lot of good, exciting possibilities for democracy. I just met with a former student of mine who is in the AI innovation space, brilliant computer science major, who also very interested in democracy, very idealistic. from a country, ironically, in the Muslim world. And you know, I see the positive possibilities, but the negative possibilities are terrifying, absolutely terrifying, because they will enable, are enabling, are going to enable in this year of elections in 2024, the turbocharging, the kind of super acceleration of all the bad features of the internet in terms of disinformation, rumor mongering, discrediting, propagation of falsehoods, the coming you know, wave of deep fakes, deep video fakes, and so on, the micro targeting of disinformation to specific audiences to maximize the effectiveness. We published a series of excellent articles, and it was a debate. It wasn't only one point of view, on AI and democracy in the Journal of Democracy in October. And I think Joao could probably get those articles for you. So I recommend those articles to you, and I share the concern. And Luis, you are right; it is evolving at the speed of light, and it means that democracies, most of all, European Union, United States, Japan, you know, some of the other advanced industrial democracies, and some of our peers in the global south, we have a lot of work to do in coordination with one another to think about, you know, what can be done, probably with a relatively light touch, but with a certain degree of vigor and close scrutiny to regulate AI and to ensure against its worst dangers. Now, to come to the first set of questions from Paz, let me say three things. Number one, oh, of course, you're right. But the European Union has borders, the Schengen borders. And so I actually think the same principle applies there, that if the European Union, you know, multinational borders of the European Union are not, you know, are not in some way taken seriously, not policed, and so on. If anybody can get on a boat or a plane or anything from anywhere in the world and wind up in Italy or Portugal or anywhere without a legal process of immigration, I can tell you, you know, where you're headed. Where you're headed is to have people like Donald Trump and Marine Le Pen, and worse than Marine Le Pen, become the leaders of your country, because at some point people are going to throw up their hands and say, you know, either you'll get very ugly racist reactions, or people will just say, don't we have rules? Don't we have processes? And so we're all headed toward more pluralistic, ethnically, racially, religiously pluralistic societies. Canada has actually handled it pretty well. Australia's handled it pretty well, very high proportions of immigration. But the reason they've handled it well is they've had control over the process, and there's been some intentionality about the absorption of immigration, with a focus on people who've got skills that society needs, and then a recognition you also need people with, you know, kind of lower skills to handle certain types of jobs that need to be done in society. But no planning, no control, you know, just a free-for-all. I don't think this is good for a society. I don't think it's good for a democracy. And I can tell you, my mentor and our mutual late dear friend, Seymour Martin Lipset,
Yes.
he co-authored a book about 40 years ago called The Politics of Unreason. And what he and his co-author Earl Rabb showed in this book is every time you had a new right-wing illiberal populist movement in the United States, in essence, some version of Alternative for Germany, it was the Know Nothings, it was the Ku Klux Klan, the John Birch Society. We've had many iterations. It always came in a period when the proportion of foreign born in the United States exceeded about 13 or 14%. And it's a way of saying that we know where we're headed as societies, right? But we need time and a certain degree of planning to absorb it and adapt to it and bring people along and reduce a sense of fear and anxiety. So I've already spoken to AI, and now on the social media question and whether it's a smoking gun or whether there is a smoking gun. I don't think there is a single smoking gun to the democratic recession or the challenges we face. But I think technological change broadly is the single biggest danger we face. It's also the single biggest opportunity. But now I'm going to say it's a danger in multiple senses, and I'll highlight two. One is the supercharging of information and the way it's conveyed to people, and the ability to micro-target people, disinform people, erase the boundary between reality and falsehood, truth and illusion, that sort of thing. The second thing is the single biggest driver of rising levels of inequality in income and wealth is also the technological revolution and the increasing returns to knowledge and kind of technological command, that the gap between people who are doing, say, ordinary work and people who are doing knowledge work and technological work and innovation is growing and growing and growing. And the experts on AI are predicting that that gap is going to accelerate in the AI era. So if we don't think about how to engage that and manage that in a way that won't leave, frankly, this is my actually single biggest fear about AI is not the information stuff. It's that most workers in the world and in our countries in 20 to 30 years will become unemployed. There will be no more truck drivers. There will be no more taxi drivers. There will be no more Uber drivers. There will be no more radiologists looking at x-rays because AI will do that. You will, the era that I'm already mourning the passing of being able to talk to a human being on a call center, that'll be gone. That'll all be, anyway, you see what I'm saying. So we really need democratic, visionary, humane, democratic thought and planning about this.
Okay, so we are going to a final lots of questions because we have, of course, to try to close the time. Luís Neves, I see your hand. Do you want to make any comment, please, before the other topics?
It's a proposal to Larry. I think that we need to go back to basics. We need a bill of rights for AI. We need really to start thinking about that very, very fast. Otherwise, we will lose totally control.
Okay, thank you very much.
I agree.
Yes, okay. So we have now to finalize. Luís Maia, I know you have a question to put to Larry. I ask you to be very brief, please. After we have Paulo Nunes and also Zebra, and then we close. Yes, please, Luís, Paulo, and Zebra, please.
Okay. Zebra, it's me, James, so it's no need for two talk. Thank you, Professor Larry Diamond. Thanks to Professor Espada, who I also want to thank him and salute. I had the chance to attend to the 1997 and 99 conference here in Portugal. And more recently, last week, I was in the conference of the web-based conference on the Democratic Index of the Economist Unit. And unfortunately, I can understand why so many countries are seeing, including us, non-democratic waves. I believe they are already happening. But unfortunately, I can understand for economical reasons and the corruption and insecurity perceptions may be wrong, but that people feel. But there is one case I can't understand at all. I mean, I could understand if it was 40 million votes, but Trump had 61 million voters in 2016, 65 million votes in 2020. After that, made a lie become an institution and consecutive lies repeatedly. What I see is the most democratic and the most important democratic country in the world, because it's our champion and our leader, also in military terms. And how can be that he just won the Republican nomination by a landslide? The Democratic Party could not find a new, younger champion. And I fear that in November we have more than 80 million American citizens, the House of Democracy, voting for such a man. How is it possible? I can't understand these numbers.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Paulo, please.
It's really an opportunity to have Larry Diamond here with us. Professor, my question to you is, because I have this curiosity as a Portuguese living in a country that I feel is probably one of the best, most advanced democracies in the world. Is this true? How do you place Portugal in the ranking of democracies? Because I've lived in other countries already, and I've never felt so free in a country like the country I'm living right now.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you have another question. I don't think so. So, Larry, I'll pass to you, and then Professor Espada, if you want to make a final comment, it will be a pleasure. Okay, Larry, please.
The United States, it's frightening. As I said, I never give in to despair. I haven't given in to despair about the November election in the United States. Neither should you. I think it's very much what we call in American basketball a jump ball. You know, anyone could capture it. It's up for grabs. But it's two things that are worrying me. One is the at least 50% possibility that Trump could become president again. And second of all, the high, almost certain likelihood that if he became president again, his second term would be a far more blatant and dangerous effort to aggrandize executive power, violate constitutional norms, destroy, checks and balances and democratic barriers to autocracy by politicizing what autocrats do, what Orban did, trying to beat up on the media and civil society, politicizing the civil service, weaponizing the FBI and the intelligence services, purging the State Department, and then the unique element for the US, a real possibility he could withdraw from NATO or undermine it or so on. I am not going to sugarcoat it. What is at stake for America and the world in this election in November of 2024 dwarfs anything else that will happen in this year of elections in the world. And a second Trump presidency, I cannot imagine anything happening in the world in the next few years that would be more catastrophic for the future of democracy than Trump being elected president again in the United States. Now, let me say, if that happens, then, at each point we deal with it. What can you do? You don't go, get on a spaceship and fly to the moon. You deal with the situation as it is. And I think if that happens, the leadership of the free world, to the extent this is possible to imagine, will pass to Europe and, maybe some other countries. And, we talk about that then. And a lot of what people have had to do in Poland and Hungary and India and elsewhere to resist creeping authoritarianism, we will at that point have to do in the United States. Our courts are very strong. That's a hopeful sign. I don't think the courts are political. There's no question they have partisan orientations, but Trump lost every single one of his more than 80 cases in 2020 that tried to overturn the election. And many of the judges that ruled against him were people he appointed. So there's some hope there and in the media, but it will be a very, very dangerous period. Why is it that more than 80 million Americans may vote for him? This is really very depressing. But one reason is that their recollection, imperfect though it is, distorted though it is, of how they were doing economically when he was president and comparing it to how they're doing now, leads many of them to think that they'll be doing better economically under Trump than they would be under Biden. I think this is heavily filtered, it's heavily questionable, but it's also true that the period of inflation that we had under Biden in his early presidential term was far more damaging to him and to perceptions of the Democratic Party and his candidacy than he even at this current moment and his advisors recognize. And take-home income, disposable income, simply has not kept up with rising prices for working and salaried Americans. And I think that is a very big factor in what's going on. Why is it that the Democratic Party has not turned to another figure? It's also Trump. And they were very scared. They have a searing memory of what happened in 1980 when Teddy Kennedy challenged Jimmy Carter for the Democratic nomination, almost took the nomination away from Carter, but severely weakened him, and then Carter was trounced by Reagan in November. Now, I think that's an imperfect analogy. I actually think a major candidate should have challenged Biden for the nomination. I advocated that personally in internal Democratic circles. I also strongly advocated and continue to advocate that Biden should not be running for re-election, but he is, and he decided to. And all of the power brokers and major donors in the Democratic Party rallied around him out of fear that if they backed someone else and the party was divided, it would make it easier for Trump to win. I think that was an incorrect analytic conclusion, but it is one that the party closed ranks around. And at least we have the reality, it's a strong one, that the party itself, organizationally and in terms of leadership, is not divided. It's unified around Biden. And, that is an advantage. And now we just have to pray that his physical and mental health will get us through the November election. And when people have to really ponder the choice between Biden and Trump, they'll say he's too old to be president, which in my opinion he is. He's got a vice president we don't have confidence in. I don't either. But, look at the alternative. We don't want authoritarianism in the United States. And if you want to know how that's going to come out, I'd say flip a coin and you will be as accurate in your prediction as any American commentator. Finally, to Paolo, I will say what I hope João understands. I miss Portugal, and I feel an urgent, compelling need to get back there sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, it's not going to work out for the Estoril Forum this year because it comes when I'm teaching a course at Stanford and I can't leave. But I'll get back there, and hopefully I will not only enjoy Estoril or Lisbon or wherever, but I'll learn what will help me understand the answer to the question. I don't know the answer. I need to rely on all of you, but I can just venture a hypothesis that it's become a fairly liberal society. And maybe the fact that it's on the periphery of Europe rather than at the heart of it, and maybe the fact that it's just such a beautiful place. I think of Portugal as like California. You even have the same bridge that we have in San Francisco. So maybe you did something to breed a society of people, who, manifest and value some degree of tolerance and pluralism. And maybe all of Joao's efforts and your collective efforts over the last 30 years to engage and shape the next generation haven't been completely in vain. So that's the best I can do.
Okay. Dr. Spada, do you want to make a final comment? It's a pleasure.
Well, just to say thank you very much. I mean, to Jaime Quezado, who organized the session, to our very good friend Larry Diamond, who gave us an excellent presentation and debate, and also thank you for the kind words you said about Portugal and about the Institute and Estoril. And by the way, we will have the 32nd annual edition of the Estoril Political Forum.
Fantastic.
Early June 3, 4, and 5. And Larry Diamond is in the program at the very opening session.
Fantastic.
With our friend Mark Plattner, and they were both the founding directors of the Journal of Democracy. Unfortunately, as you have just mentioned, the timing coincides.
Will be virtual, yeah.
Okay. But we'll have a virtual conversation. And just to conclude, Mr. Chairman, please allow me to say the title of the Estoril Political Forum, which has not been yet officially announced, but I think I can share it with you. Yes,
of course.
And the title is Commemorating the Portuguese Revolution of 1974 and Evaluating the Future of Democracy's Third Wave. So some of the crucial topics that our friend Larry Diamond told us today about, and we'll be delighted to have you there. I mean, unfortunately, you cannot be in person, but through video.
Okay, thank you very much.
And you are all invited to this.
Yes, of course. And Luis Neves, we hope that you can be with us, because I think technology and the politics will be more and more important, okay? I will send you some information on that, okay? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for everybody. Have a nice week, and we'll be in touch, okay? Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye, Larry.